Hello, Doofer911 here, and today is going to be the first video in my new procedure guide series for this aircraft, the PMDG Boeing 777. In this video, we're going to be looking at two different procedures. These will be the electrical power-up procedure and also the preliminary pre-flight procedure. So at the moment, the aircraft is parked here at London Heathrow, and the aircraft is completely switched off. It is completely dormant. There is nothing you can do with the aircraft. So this video is going to show you how to establish electrical power in the aircraft. And once the aircraft has electrical power, then flight crews can begin to configure the aircraft and prepare it for a flight. So let's jump into the flight deck and take a look at how we can do this. Okay, so here we are in the flight deck, and you can see if I take a look around that all of the panels are switched off. There's no lights anywhere on the overhead, and you'll also notice that it's completely silent within the flight deck. So let's look at how we can change that. So the first step is to come up to the overhead panel, which we can do by right clicking and changing my cockpit view to the overhead lower panel. So the first step is to turn on the battery master switch, which is over here on the electrical power panel. Now, if you've flown other simulator aircraft before, you might be aware that turning on the battery master switch alone is enough to sort of establish electrical power within the aircraft. Now, the 777 is a quote-unquote smart aircraft, so even though battery power has been established, only the absolute most essential systems are getting electrical power at this time. Once a different source of electrical power has been established, that's when the aircraft will start to sort of wake up and more electrical systems will come online. So after we turn on the battery master switch, we need to come over to the hydraulic panel, and we want to check the C1 and C2 electric hydraulic pump switches. We want to make sure that both of these are switched off. Below that, we want to check all four hydraulic demand selectors, and we want to make sure that all four of these are off. Next, we want to move down and we want to check the left and right windscreen wiper selectors. We want to make sure that both of those are in the off position. And lastly, what I like to do is I like to turn on the navigation lights at this point. Now, this isn't part of the formal procedure in PMDG's documentation, however, it's a bit of an unwritten rule in aviation. If a maintenance crew or a flight crew is on board an aircraft which is on the ground and actively working on it, what they will tend to do is turn on the navigation lights. This provides an indicator to people outside of the aircraft that there are staff on board the aircraft and actively working, and that the aircraft has electrical power established also. So that's the last thing we need to do on the overhead panel. What I'm going to do now is actually change my view to the first officer's seat, because it provides us a bit of a better view of the next couple of controls. So first, we want to check the landing gear lever, and we want to make sure this is in the down position. And then next, we want to move down to the control stand, and we want to check the alternate flap system. We want to make sure this is switched off, and that the alternate flap selector is also in the off position. So I'm just going to jump across back to the captain's seat now for the next part. So at this stage of the procedure, we could branch and we could do one of two things. We could now establish electrical power using ground power sources, or we could use the APU to supply electrical power to the aircraft. And I'm going to show you both in this video. So we're going to start by using ground power to complete the electrical power up procedure. So to do that, what we need to do is we actually need to come down to the CDU, because there's a couple of simulator options that we need to change first of all. Now you'll notice that the CDU is not switched on. So what we need to do is we need to press and hold the menu button. So click on that, hold it, and then the CDU switches on. Now this is not something that would work in the real aircraft. The CDU in the PMDG also acts as sort of a options menu for the simulation, so that's why we can do this in the simulator here. Once the CDU is switched on, we want to go into FS Actions or Flight Sim Actions. Tap the button next to that, and then we want to go into Ground Connections. So from here, we want to take a look at the second line, and we want to select what type of ground power we have. Now, we could select GPU 1 plug, so this would typically be a mobile ground power unit, which would be plugged into the aircraft. Alternatively, we could have 2 plugs, which is typically where you have 2 electrical plugs connected to sort of ground systems at an airport. And the 777 can use either 1 plug or 2. It doesn't really affect the operation of the aircraft at this point. So once you've selected which type of ground power you would like, you need to come down to the third line and then connect that ground power. After it's been connected, you then want to come back to line 1 and just double check and make sure that the wheel chocks have been set. Once that's all been done on the CDU there, what we need to do is come back to the overhead lower panel. So if we come back to the electrical panel here on the overhead, you will notice that both the primary external power and secondary external power lights now have the switches now have available lights. Now, if we were just using the single GPU switch, then only the primary external power lights would be on and available. As I said, the 777 can happily use 1 or 2 electrical or ground power sources, so it doesn't affect the operation of the aircraft. So once you've confirmed that there is either 1 or 2 available lights, you can enable the switches and establish electrical power from a ground power source. Now you'll notice that when I did that, you'll see that the overhead panel has lit up, and you'll also start to hear some of the ventilation and equipment cooling fans will start to switch on. So this now marks the beginning of the aircraft starting to power itself on. What the aircraft is going to do is it's going to go through a sort of a power on self-test. Now if you have a computer at home, you'll know that a computer doesn't just switch on, it has to go through like built-in tests to make sure all the hardware is working correctly. And it's kind of similar to what the 777 is doing right now. So as it does this power on self-test, you will hear the ventilation and the cooling fans will speed up, they'll slow down. You'll start to see various displays will start to switch on as well. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of the power on test. Now, a fair warning to headphone users and even loudspeaker users, part of the test is a loudspeaker test within the flight deck, which emits this horrible feedback screeching sound, so warning, it's about to happen any second now. Why they had to model that in the simulation, I don't know, but fortunately when that happens, that's just about marks the end of the power on test here. So you can see that all of the screens have now switched themselves on, and yeah, this essentially marks the end of the electrical power up procedure using ground power. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reset the aircraft back into its cold and dark state where it's completely switched off, and we're going to go through the same process again, but this time use APU power to provide the electrical power to the aircraft. So I'm going to come down to the CDU here. This time I'm going to go into PMDG setup and go into panel state load, and we're going to load the cold and dark panel state there. I'm going to execute that to confirm it, and you'll see that the panels switch off and we start to get a countdown timer. Now, because this is a very complex simulation of the 777, the actual base physics within the simulator, in this case which is prepared or P3D, is actually not good enough to model all of the systems within the aircraft. So when you change the state of the aircraft using the CDU menu there, it has to reset all of this kind of back-end system stuff as well, which is why you have a sort of a countdown timer of 20 seconds there. Anyway, As you can see, that's the aircraft back into its what we call cold and dark state, or its completely dormant state. So let me just run through the electrical power up procedure more quickly this time, and then we'll take a look at establishing electrical power using the APU, or auxiliary power unit. So we're going to come up to the overhead. We're going to look at the battery master switch. We're going to turn that on. We're going to check the C1 and C2 switches on the hydraulic panel and make sure those are off. We're going to check the demand selectors on the hydraulic panel, make sure all 4 of those are off. We're going to check the left windscreen wiper and right windscreen wiper, make sure both of those are off. And I'm also going to turn on the navigation lights, so once electrical power is established, those will be on to show people outside the aircraft that electrical power is established on the aircraft. We'll check the forward panel and check the landing gear lever, make sure that's in the down position. And I'm not going to change my view for it here, but we also check the alternate flap system, make sure that's off, and make sure the selector is in the off position. So now we're at the point where we could either select ground power or APU power. For the APU, we don't need to do anything on the CDU here. What we do need to do is take a look back at the lower overhead panel. Now you'll notice this time around, because we haven't connected any ground power, there's no available light on either the primary or secondary external power there. So to use the APU, the first thing we want to do is check the APU generator switch here and make sure that's on. And then we want to start the APU by coming up to the APU selector here, right click to switch it on, and then right click again to start it. Now what will happen is the selector will hit the start position and then automatically spring back to the on position. Now unfortunately there's not really any indication as to what the APU is doing in the flight deck until the APU generator starts generating power, but if you want to double check, you can move to an external view here. Now you'll see that the APU inlet flap has opened up, which allows air into the APU. And now if you also listen carefully, you'll also hear what sounds like a jet engine starting up, which is the APU itself starting up. So if I come back into the flight deck here, now once the APU reaches its operating speed, then the flight deck and all of the electrical systems will just spring into life automatically. So it should only be a couple more seconds at this point. There we go. So now the APU is running at its operating speed. It's now causing the APU generator to start generating electrical power. And you can see that the aircraft has now started to spring into life. Now what's going to happen, as before, as it's going to run through its sort of power on self-test, or its built-in startup test procedure, where all of the electrical systems are going to make sure that all of the hardware is working correctly and as expected. So this will take the same amount of time as before, and again, fair warning, at the end of the test you're going to get that horrible screeching sound through the flight deck's loudspeaker system. So I'm going to skip the video here and just skip to the end of the self-test where everything is switched on and ready for use. Okay, and here we are at the end of the power on testing phase there, and once again that marks the end of the electrical power up procedure using the APU as the electrical source. So from here, what we can do is go straight into the preliminary pre-flight procedure, where there's only a couple of steps, but they are quite important. So for the preliminary pre-flight procedure, what we want to do is come up to the overhead panel as before. Now the switch that we're interested in here is up here, is the ADIRU switch. What we want to do is turn this on, and this will start the air data and inertial reference system. Now what this will do is this system comprises of various gyroscopes and instruments and GPS units, and all of these systems will work together to accurately plot the aircraft's position in 3 dimensions, or accurately plot its position in the world essentially. So what we want to do is we want to enable that system, and what will happen is that system will automatically begin to configure itself and plot the aircraft's position. We can see how it's doing. If we take a look at the navigation display here, you'll see that we have a little message which says time to align, and we have a countdown timer in minutes and seconds. So what will happen is it's going to take the system at this point 7 minutes and 23 seconds for all of the various components to cross-check each other, to calculate the position and to accurately plot its position. Now, for you, if this is the first time you're doing this, you might not see this message, and I'll tell you why. Obviously this takes a little bit of time for the system to do this, however this is in real life. In the simulation, PMDG have offered a couple of shortcuts to make this process much quicker. So if we move down to the CDU here, we can take a look at the options for the IRS alignment time. If we go into PMDG setup and select options, and then simulation, and then IRS options here. Now, because I'm a bit of an enthusiast, I have my alignment time set to be realistic, which is usually somewhere between 7 to 9 minutes. By default, I believe that PMDG have this setting set to fast, where the alignment process will only take 30 seconds. Still, if this is too much time for you, you can change the option and have it set to be instant, where the IRS alignment will instantly align. So all you need to do is just check or tap the button next to the option that you want, and then you can return back through the menu screens back to the main CDU menu page there. So now that the ADIRU system is going through its alignment process, there's a couple of other things that we can check. First, what we can do is take a look, whoops, the view's going a bit crazy there. We can take a look at the lower center display. By default, it will start up with the secondary engine page, and this is quite handy because this is what we want to check. So first, what we want to check is we want to check the engine oil quantity, which if we zoom in here, it'll be the second to last measure on the secondary engine page. You can see that we've got 28 on both engines. Now, if the oil quantity was dangerously low for any reason, you would have a little RF, 2 letters next to either the left or right engine readouts. RF stands for refill, and that would allow you to then refill the oil, or that would then indicate that you need to refill the oil within the aircraft. Now, if you did need to refill the oil quantity, you can do that again through the CDU here. So to do that, you would go into FS Actions, and then next to Ground Maintenance, go into that page. You then have various options here for refilling hydraulic fluid, engine oil, and so on and so forth. So you would simply go into the engine oil menu there, and you can see it, that would have done it right there. The next thing that we can check on the lower center display is the status page. So if you've seen my earlier videos, you know that you can change the pages which are shown by coming over to the display selector panel here on the glare shield. We click on the status button there, that will change the display on the lower panel here. So what we're looking at is this top box, which gives us information about the hydraulic system. Now we can see that the quantity is 0.98, 0.95, 0.97, and once again, if any of these systems were dangerously low, they would have a little RF next to them to indicate refill. And once again, if you wanted to refill, you can go onto the CDU here and just select refill hydraulic fluids and select that option, and that would take care of all of that for you there. The last thing we can also check on this status page is also the crew oxygen pressure. I'm not sure what the minimum amount is, however in the simulator you'll usually find it's about 1,800 psi, so if it's around that mark then it's fine and safe for flight. Naturally, you're not reliant on using emergency oxygen if you have a problem while you're sat at home playing this on your computer, but again, it's just another element of realism to the simulator there. The last item that you might want to also check is the parking brake. Now, if you have chocks in, that will prevent movement of the aircraft on the ground. However, if you want to, you can opt to select the parking brake at this time. Now, one last thing to say before we wrap up this video. It is imperative that you do not move the aircraft while the ADIRU system is trying to align itself. If you were to move the aircraft, say by slewing it to a different position on the airport in the simulator, then that would induce significant errors in the navigation systems within the aircraft. So the best thing to do is to let the aircraft align itself, and then you'll be absolutely fine after that. So don't let the aircraft roll, or don't try to move the aircraft at all while that alignment process is going on. So one other thing to be aware of is once the timer reaches 0, nothing is going to happen on the displays because it's reliant on something that we will cover in a future video. Once the ADIRU system has finished its alignment process, what we need to do is we need to tell the onboard computers where we are in the world, and we'll do that through the FMC and this position initialization page. As I said, we'll take a look at that in a future video, so that's not anything to worry about there. Once the timer does reach 0, we will get a little warning message, not a warning, but a little caution saying enter inertial position, which I said we can do on the CDU, but that's outside of the scope for this video. So once you've got the ADIRU alignment running, and once you've checked the center display, that marks the end of the preliminary pre-flight procedure. And that also brings us to the end of this first video. So as I said, these two procedures are only really applicable if you're starting the aircraft from cold and dark. The next procedures that we'll be taking a look at will be the CDU data entry. So that's where we're going to be entering all of our navigation and performance data into the CDU, or the computer display unit here, and that's how we're going to build our flight path and begin to get the aircraft configured and ready for a flight. So if you've watched this all the way through, thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully you found this video valuable, and yeah, I'll hopefully see you for the next one. So until the next time, thank you all very much for watching, take care out there, and I will catch you all later.